Hey, what's going on YouTube? So if you're following along in the Python playlist, so far we've talked about strings and integers, and we've looked at a few methods that come with each one of those data types. And if those are unfamiliar terms to you, maybe go back, watch those videos. Or if you're just hopping in because you saw we're going to talk about functions, going to be helpful to make sure you know what a string is. And yeah. So when we're programming, we're essentially giving instructions to the computer, right? So declaring some variable, and we want to print this out, and maybe we want to change the formatting here, something like that, run it. So we're like providing these instructions to the computer. Now, what if I have the same instructions that I want to execute several times, just for different inputs? If we're calling up here this string an input, we can pretend it's like a user input or something. But what if I want to do this operation a lot of times on different inputs? Well, you could. Okay, we've got some other string here, and we type it out again. We'll just name it. There we go. Could do that. For 2, maybe not such a big deal. But what if I have like 10 of these that I want to do this for? Then those lines start adding up, and this isn't all that better than just typing this in the first place, right? That's where kind of the real power of programming comes in, is we have ways to reuse these instructions. So one of those ways is functions. All that is kind of a predefined set of instructions that we can call in our code. So we can define it, and then we can call it. In Python, to define a function, we use this def keyword. Then we give it a name. In its simplest form, we can just do opening, closing parentheses, and then colon there. And here you can see the text editor did it for me. We need to indent, so that'll be, if your tab is set up this way, it should be 4 spaces. But we need this indent here so that Python knows which code is part of the function definition. So we'll give it some message here. I'm inside the function. And I'll go back and use the double quotes since I used a single quote here. So you can see we didn't get any errors here. It ran the code, but it didn't print it. The reason is we've defined the function, but in order to use the code that we've put in this definition, we have to call this function. So later on in our code, we call the function by typing the name and then parentheses. So if we run that, now you can see we've called the function and it's executed the instructions that were inside of that definition. That can be a little bit of a confusing concept, but Let me know in the comments if that makes sense or you need some clarification. That one hung me up for a while, but so we can build on this by passing in arguments to the function. We have to add them to our definition here. Let's just say, we'll name that one some input. And by defining it here, inside of this definition, we can reference it by that variable name, some input. Yeah, let's just print it out. Some input. So now when we call the function, we have to provide that argument. If we run that, so you can see when we call it, we gave it this string hello. And if we follow that through this function definition, hello is going to be the value anywhere there's this some input variable. So we can see it got printed out. We look down here, works out. So this argument like this, where we just give it a variable name here, we pass it in, that's a positional argument, because we could give another argument like another input. And down here, we pass in that second argument, which is going to be another input. And the way the function knows which one is which is because of their position when we called the function. So we can run that. There you go. We can also use keyword arguments. So that kind of lets us name the argument. So that kind of lets us name the arguments on both sides, in the definition and when we call the function. And that looks like this. So let's say let's say ending, and we'll give it a default there. Oh yeah, I didn't do anything with it. Let's put it at the end. Cool, so we add that argument. We're going to add that to the print, and we added it down here to our call. There we go. So kind of cool thing, if we exclude that argument when we call the function, since we defined it up here with this default, we'll still have this value when it's not provided. So that's the gist of it. Back to our first example, let's just get rid of all this. We had a name. So let's do this. Let's do like a first and last name. And let's say we're going to use an F string, and we're just going to like format this. So we've got first, we're going to make it all uppercase. Then we'll do new line, last name, it'll be last, oops. Cool, let's run that. Great, so we can see it formats our text there, makes it uppercase, puts last name on a new line. So if we want to do this for a bunch of people, maybe we should create a function for this. So we start with that def keyword. We'll name it format name. The first positional argument is going to be the first name. Second positional argument will be oh, excuse me. What am I thinking? This is Python. We know that camel case stuff. Kind of the convention is to use underscores. Maybe if you're coming from a different language, maybe you're used to seeing camel case like that. Python, the convention is to use underscores like that. So that's what we'll do. First name, last name. And remember, this is kind of like declaring variables up here that are just going to be available inside of this function definition. So we'll put our code into that definition there. First needs to be first name. Last needs to be last name. Now we can call this function and we'll pass in that first and last name. Run that. There we go. Get the same result. So now you can see, since we have that function definition, we can just write this one line several times and be able to get all of that output that we need to display for whatever reason. There we go. So that's kind of on a basic level, the function, why it's useful, what you can do with it, and we'll keep exploring that as we look at more data types and why that might be useful.